Hello, this is Faith at Faith and Books, and I'm doing my next installment of May is for Magazine. And I know that I was going to focus on Ida Tarbell. However, while thumbing through the 1898 volume from May to October 1898, see that, of McClure's, which is the magazine that I'm exploring, I ran into this short article that I can read out loud to you in the manner of Sean Standfast. There it is, by a woman reporter. I'm focusing on these women journalists. And it's her interview, sort of recounting her interview with Clara Barton. So 1898 was the Spanish-American War, and McClure's was really pro-war. Like, it's every article almost has to do with the war, or something to do with how great America is, and you know, so it's very, very pro war. And I haven't seen anything in these by Ida Tarbell. There's very little women's journalism here. There's some short stories by an Octave Thanet, and there's some poems, and there is one article about Mary Todd Lincoln. But that's it. There's no, the other kind of running Ida Tarbell installments aren't present in these 1898 volumes. But I thought I would just go ahead and read this out loud because it's short enough that I can do it. It's not a long article. And I actually looked up the woman's name. Her name is Elsie Reasoner. And she came from Salt Lake City, and I found an article, which I will link to below, where they actually wrote up a little column about her becoming a war correspondent and working for McClure's and going to Cuba to be a war correspondent. So I'll just go ahead and get a sip of water real quick. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and read this to you. The light's up pretty bright. I gotta hold this up so I can really see it. Okay, so this is Elsie Reasoner interviewing or recounting what Clara Barton had told her. And I had not thought of Clara Barton at all. I mean, I associated her with the Civil War, and I read about her when I was a kid, but I really don't know very much about her at all. Anyway, here we go. What a Young Girl Saw at Siboney. Siboney. Don't know what that is. By Elsie Reasoner. As the state of Texas steamed into port, we sighted on our starboard bow 4 gray, sinister battleships, while to port a white, hopeful messenger of courage rocked the great relief boat Solace. Massive cruisers and blunt-nosed torpedo boats were about us, and here and there, like swallows, skimmed tiny yachts and launches. I talked with Miss Barton of her experience. She told me how, the night after our first great battle, when hungry men needed food, weak men needed stimulant, and wounded men needed care, word came from General Shafter to seize all means of transportation and to hurry supplies to the front. It was at this juncture that the Red Cross people arrived. When they went ashore, they found no suitable habitation for the nurses. Yet undaunted, the nurses packed their satchels and went forward to their work. Under the efficient direction of Miss Barton, supplies from the Red Cross boat were sent to the front long before any other. After superintending the loading of 2 carts of provisions, she took her seat beside the driver and rode to the firing line 10 miles away. Her story of her experience is most thrilling. We arrived, she said, at night in a drizzling rain. All along the line, the wounded were lying in trenches. A few were nursing a sickly fire of soaked brushwood. No food nor comforts of any kind were visible. We immediately kindled an opposition fire, I don't know what that is, and unloaded 1 cart of provisions. Out of the extracts and cordials we had brought with us, I succeeded in making a great kettle of excellent gruel. Little did I think 25 years ago, when doing the same thing for our boys in blue and gray, that at this time and place I should be following the same old recipe. Our next trouble was in clothing the wounded. Their terrible condition cannot be described. When they were carried in from the battlefield, their clothes were soaked with blood and rain and caked with mud. Heroic measures were necessary. With a few quick slashes, they were cut loose, stripped off, and thrown away. A few surgeons were there to attend to the care of their wounds, but with no shelter, no clothes, no provisions of any kind, the poor fellows were reduced to the primitive condition of the savage, and could only be laid in rows, weak, wounded, unconscious, and stark naked upon the bare, wet ground. I hope that never again may I see such a pitiful sight. From some rolls of muslin we had luckily brought with us, we tore strips the length of a man and covered them. All night we tended the fitful brush fire and made kettle after kettle of the strengthening broth. Next day we journeyed back, and the following night I slept on a dry goods box in an old abandoned post office. In a nearby house were the fever patients, tossing restlessly, impatience of the enemy in their veins, eager to be once more in the thick of the battle smoke. Moving noiselessly among them, bathing here a fevered brow, administering there a helpful medicine, were the sisters of the Red Cross. Deftly, quietly, and skillfully they performed their work, equal to any emergency. One sat in a corner with the head of a Negro in her lap, carefully bathing his black face and fanning away the troublesome insects. He had fought gallantly, had proved that in his dusky veins flowed the true soldier's blood. For 2 hours the nurse sat, her cramped position bespeaking complete fatigue. In an outer room, over a hot fire, others were making kettles of strengthening gruel, and still others were assisting the surgeons in dressing wounds. At midday the heat was intolerable. The blinding sunlight beat down in great waves, and the white sand gathered it up and threw it back with dazzling brilliance that blinded the eyes and made strong brains reel. Not a breath was stirring. Up the narrow street, the silence was broken by strange moans and cries. It was the hospital of the wounded Spanish prisoners. Small, uninviting tents were scattered here and there, and in them lay weak, despairing men. Some babbled in delirium. Others cried like children with the pain of their wounds, while all of them shot out sullen looks of revenge. Among them, with steady hands and unmoved faces, were the Red Cross doctors. A number of gaunt, half-clad reconcentrados looked on idly. The quiet courage of the American soldiers, who accepted all that came without complaint, was in sharp contrast to the constant moaning of the Spaniards, many of whom were not badly hurt. A lieutenant of one of the regular regiments was brought in horribly wounded. A Mauser ball, M-A-U-S-E-R, a Mauser ball had pierced his shoulder, and half of his hip was shot away. The surgeons looked at him and shook their heads. Then he smiled and called a newspaper correspondent who was standing in the doorway of the tent. "Will you send a cable message for me?" he asked. Taking a pencil, he wrote an address in 2 words, "Am well," and asked that it be sent to his wife at a frontier fort in Montana. As we stood in an open tent, a poor fellow was brought in on a litter. He had a nasty wound which threatened lifelong enfeeblement. As he entered the tent, he spied a friend. "Hello, Fred," he shouted. "Where did they get you?" "In the shoulder," replied his comrade. "And you?" "They did me in both legs." Good shot for the Dons, wasn't it?" D-O-N-S. I guess that's what they called the Spanish, was the laughing retort. In all the place there was not a groan, not a word of complaint, save now and then an ejaculation of impatience, lest the fighting should be over before they should have another chance. So a little bit propagandistic there, Americans good, enemies bad. But I thought that was interesting. And next time I do the McClure's thing, next week, I will definitely start focusing on Ida Tarbell, and I think I'm just going to spend the rest of May reading and discussing her her expose on Standard Oil. At least I don't have the whole book, but I just have the articles that she wrote in 1902 in the collection I have her. I think I just have 1902. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I will talk to you later. Bye.